There is a saying that the truth can be stranger than fiction. Given the extraordinary events that took place, it may seem as though the bizarre case of murderous teenager Daniel LaPlante comes straight out of a Hollywood horror movie. But the true life and crimes of Daniel LaPlante would, in fact, write a truly terrifying non-fictional story. Daniel holds a rare prestige in the history of true crime. It is not the murders for which Daniel was responsible that earned him his infamy, but the nightmarish events which came before them. You see, Daniel's pre-murder behaviour gave him his folk devil appeal. The murders that followed were the events that brought him to public attention, and from there, the shocking revelation of his dark past emerged. The Daniel LaPlante case was a tale of jealousy, delusion, desperation, and misplaced affection, resulting in the loss of 3 innocent lives. In addition, Daniel was responsible for the intense psychological traumatization of a number of other victims, in a series of bizarre acts which would even sound too far-fetched for fiction. Daniel was born in 1970 and raised in Townsend by his mother and stepfather alongside his 2 brothers, Stephen and Matthew. From the very beginning, his childhood began in a way that would be hard for most to fathom. Although the details about his childhood are vague, it was well documented that Daniel had a miserable and traumatic childhood. Daniel suffered sexual and psychological abuse at the hands of multiple adults in his life. Most of his punishment was administered by his father and stepfather, who allegedly tormented him physically, emotionally, and sexually on a regular basis. His problematic upbringing affected every aspect of his life. He was diagnosed with dyslexia, a lifelong neurological disability that impacts the ability to read, write, spell, and have a good sense of direction. It can be managed with special instruction and support, with great success coming from early intervention. Unfortunately for Daniel, his disability was left untreated and unsupported, resulting in academic struggles at school. To compound his issues, Daniel's social life was almost non-existent. Other children found him creepy and weird. He consistently came to school smelling bad and wearing dirty clothes. As a result, Daniel was ostracized by his classmates and teachers. In his early teenage years, Daniel's declining mental condition and general reluctance towards his appearance, hygiene, and self-improvement caught the attention of school officials, and they referred him to a psychiatrist. Had it not been for the tragic circumstances which arose, this particular incident could have been a turning point in young Daniel's life. It was here that Daniel was diagnosed with hyperactivity disorder, also known as ADHD, a chronic condition including attention difficulty, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness. The disorder was a poor complement for his already deteriorating mental state as a result of his difficult home and school life. Eventually, Daniel's relationship with the psychiatrist took a dark turn when the psychiatrist made sexual advances towards him. Then, for the following year, the psychiatrist sexually abused Daniel during their sessions, something which no doubt left a lasting impact on Daniel's psyche. Like his father before him, this gentleman had been trusted to care for Daniel, but instead added another layer of grief to his already painful existence. The abuse lasted more than a year. Unsurprisingly, Daniel ended the sessions in an even worse mental state than he had begun. It was around the same time that Daniel's criminal career began. Instead of spending his time the way most teens did, with friends, playing sports, and doing homework, Daniel would break into people's homes. He spent his evenings breaking into people's properties in the Townsend area and stealing their valuables. As his burglary skills improved, so did his thirst for torment. By age 15, he was breaking into people's homes and not only taking their possessions, but also leaving behind items in his wake. He would also move items around in people's homes in such a way that it was clear someone had entered their property, but not so much that it was immediately obvious. He would move items and furniture and leave half-drunk beverages lying around. Eventually, he was invading people's homes purely for the purpose of playing mind games with the owners. It was the thrill of being in someone else's home without them knowing that truly excited Daniel. It brought him pleasure knowing that he was scaring people, even making them think they were losing their minds. In 1986, Daniel set in motion a series of events which he would be forever known for. He had obtained the phone number of a family's address in the nearby town of Pepperell, Massachusetts. The house belonged to a family of three: a father, Brian Andrews, and his two daughters, 15-year-old Annie and 8-year-old Jessica. The family were going through a rough period after the loss of Brian's wife and the two girls' beloved mother to cancer. Being thrust into the role of single parent, Brian had to work more in order to support his household, which meant he was not able to spend as much time with his daughters. Despite the age gap, Annie and Jessica got along well. They even became closer after losing their mother. One day, Annie received an anonymous call from a young man named Daniel LaPlante who informed her that he was studying at the same school as her and had gotten her number from one of his friends. Being 15, Annie had begun thinking about boys. She and her friends would often chat about dating, who had a crush on who, conversations typical of teenage girls. So as you could imagine, when Annie began receiving phone calls at home from a boy, she was intrigued, especially after the way Daniel described himself. He told Annie that he was a good-looking, athletic, blonde, well-educated boy who also lived in the area. As the week progressed, the two spoke on the phone regularly. Annie enjoyed talking to Daniel, so when he asked her out on a date, she agreed. He would pick her up at her house and they would go to the local fair. Annie had no idea about the horrors that would follow. Annie was thrilled when the day finally arrived. The doorbell rang and she rushed to answer it. But when she saw the boy standing outside, she was surprised to find he did not resemble what she was expecting at all. He said on the phone that he was tall, blonde, and athletic, but he was none of these things. Daniel was about 5 foot and 8 inches, and thin, with greasy dark hair and heavy, untamed eyebrows. His skin was riddled with acne. Despite her dismay, Annie still went on a date. However, as soon as she set eyes on him, she felt something was amiss. When they were walking through the fair, Annie was candid with Daniel about her family, regretfully mentioning the recent death of her mother due to cancer. The mention of death seemed to flick a switch within Daniel. His eyes suddenly lit up, and he became incredibly animated. He began to bombard Annie with questions regarding the death. The interrogation from Daniel regarding Annie's deceased mother, including questions regarding how severe her illness was, made Annie extremely uncomfortable. Annie decided that after being with Daniel for an hour, she had had enough of this strange and morbid character. Telling him she had to go home, she abandoned the date. She made it abundantly clear that she did not wish to see or hear from him again. Annie didn't willingly see Daniel again following their date. However, she would later discover him again under circumstances which almost defy explanation. One evening, Annie and her sister Jessica attempted to contact the deceased mother by performing a seance in their basement. This performance was purely out of naivety. They had no real expectation that anything would come of it. While sleeping, however, Jessica and Annie heard a rhythmic knocking against their bedroom walls. Amazingly, it appeared as though the girls' seance was successful. They spoke to the unseen force in the middle of the night as if it were their mother. They asked the spirit questions, and it replied by knocking against the wall. It would appear that the girls had actually discovered a supernatural force at work. However, the excitement was short-lived. Eventually, the tapping became pretty much constant and only took place when they were alone at home or when their father was sleeping. The tapping was becoming so disruptive that the girls were unable to sleep. Not long after, objects and furniture began moving around the house and disappearing. In one case, one of the girls placed food on the kitchen counter, left the room for 5 minutes and returned to find it gone. They told their father about what was happening and told him that they believed they were being haunted by a ghost in the house. but he told them this was nonsense, reassuring them that they were just grief-stricken over the loss of their mother. During a quiet evening in January 1987, Jessica and Annie were in the living room when a strange knock began. At this point, the constant tapping had become so commonplace that it was driving the girls to insanity. However, on this particular evening, the torment was coming from somewhere different. Instead of the knocking coming from the walls, it was coming from the basement. Annie grabbed a kitchen knife, and the two girls warily walked towards the basement. A terrifying message greeted them as they descended below their house. Written in blood red on the basement wall was a message: "I'm in your room. Come and find me." It was like a scene from a horror film. Except for Annie and Jessica, this wasn't a nightmare. Without hesitation, the sisters fled the house and ran into their neighbor's home. They stayed there until their father returned from work and told them what they had discovered. Unfortunately, Brian didn't believe his daughters. It would be hard for anyone to believe it. Annie and Jessica were ordered by him to undergo counseling in order to deal with what he believed was the main source of their declining mental state: the grief of losing their mother. Daniel was not done terrorizing the girls. 2 weeks have passed since the basement incident, and the knocking on the walls has stopped. However, the relief was short-lived. On a day when both of the sisters were home alone, the knocking began again. This time, it was coming from Annie's bedroom. Once again, Annie picked up a kitchen knife, and together the two girls walked up the stairs. Upon reaching Annie's bedroom, they noticed another message written on the wall. It said, "I'm back. Find me if you can." Screaming, the girls spun around, hurtling down the stairs as fast as they could. The two bolted out the front door and ran into the neighbor's house. Shaking with fright, they told the neighbor that they had once again found writing on the wall in their house. In sympathy with the girls, who had just lost their mother and spent so much time at home without their father, the neighbor told them they could call their father. Annie and Jessica called their father to let him know the tapping had started again and more writing appeared on the wall. Irritated, he told the girls he would come home. Despite this, he still believed they were making the whole thing up. Brian immediately entered the house and ascended the stairs. Sure enough, there was a writing on the wall. Brian turned to find another message on the wall that the girls had not mentioned to him during the phone call. It had appeared since they fled the house. It read, "Marry me." It was then that it hit Brian. The writing on the walls, the knocking, the mysterious moving objects were not just products of his daughter's active imaginations. They were, in fact, the manifestation of something far more sinister. Suddenly, something moved in his peripheral vision. When he turned around to see a short, scrawny boy standing in the hall, he was astonished. The boy's face was caked in makeup. He was wearing a blonde wig and a dress that belonged to Brian's deceased wife. In his hand, he held a hatchet. Brian tried to apprehend Daniel, but he escaped and seemingly vanished into thin air. The police were called by the neighbor, and when they arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the Andrews home. After finding that each message had been written in ketchup, the local police searched the house for clues on how Daniel accessed the house in the first place. One officer found a peculiar discovery behind a chest of drawers in Annie's bedroom, and perhaps an explanation for how Daniel disappeared so quickly. It was a small opening leading to a crawl space. When the officer stepped inside the crawl space, he was met by a small, dark-haired boy. It was none other than Daniel LaPlante, that same boy Annie had gone on that terrible date with. The officers removed Daniel from the crawl space and placed him under arrest. Once Daniel was removed from the scene, the police conducted a thorough search of the Andrews residence and made a shocking discovery. They concluded that Daniel had been living inside the walls of the Andrews home. The passageway they discovered Daniel in had been tunneled around to other areas of the house. It gets creepier. Police noticed a handful of peepholes dotted around the house so that Daniel could watch Annie anywhere in the house. As evidenced by the hatchet, Daniel was wielding at the time, Annie and Jessica made a lucky escape that night and are lucky to be alive. Being 16 at the time meant Daniel was placed in a juvenile detention facility for 10 months between January and October 1987. He turned 17 that same year on May the 16th. Daniel's case was transferred from juvenile court to adult court in October 1987. The fact that he was charged as an adult meant that he could post bail, which his mother assisted him with. After posting bail, he was released from the juvenile detention facility. Daniel was charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed assault in a dwelling, breaking and entering a dwelling, larceny exceeding $100, and malicious destruction of property. On December the 11th, 1987, he was expected to appear before the Middlesex Superior Court. However, fate would intervene, and this appearance was not to be. Daniel had another agenda. His stay in the juvenile detention facility did not positively influence his criminal behavior. In November that same year, he broke into a neighbor's home. It was clear that Daniel was not playing mind games with his burglary victims by rearranging their furniture, as he had done previously. Instead, he entered the home and stole 2 firearms. On the afternoon of December the 1st, 1987, Daniel, armed with one of the stolen firearms, walked a half-mile from his home to that of the Gustafson family. There, Daniel was greeted by pregnant 33-year-old Priscilla and her 2 young children, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. When Daniel invaded his home, Priscilla's husband Andrew, an attorney, was at work. The house was eerily quiet when he arrived home from work that day at around 5 p.m. He made his way up the stairs and was met with the most harrowing sight of his life. Andrew discovered Priscilla lying face down on her bed, her pillows dyed red with blood splatter. She had been raped by Daniel and then shot multiple times in the head at point-blank range. Having been terrified of what he might discover, Andrew fled from the house and called the police. It would have been impossible for him to face the prospect of finding his children on his own. When the police arrived, they discovered the bodies of Andrew's 2 children in separate bathtubs. William had been drowned in the upstairs bathroom, while Abigail suffered a similar fate in the downstairs bathroom. 2 .22 caliber bullet casings, an untouched can of beer, and semen stainings were found in the master bedroom. Footprints were also found in a flower bed outside the home. The peaceful community of Townsend was upended. Nobody could fathom who could do something so evil. Priscilla was an extremely sweet and caring person who worked at the church as a nursery school teacher. She sang in a church choir and was a devout Christian faith. Detectives compiled a list of possible suspects. In light of his previous crimes against Andrew's family and his recent release from a juvenile detention center, Daniel LaPlante was a high priority. There is another intriguing connection between Daniel and the items taken from the Gustafson home, including a cable television box and a cordless phone. Daniel was notorious for robberies in the area. At the time, he was living less than a mile from the Gustafsons with his mother and abusive stepfather. The following day, on December the 2nd, 1987, police found Daniel at the Townsend Public Library and questioned him. He denied any involvement in the murders, telling the police that he had been home watching TV most of the day and then attended his 6-year-old niece's birthday party. Apart from their suspicions, they had no hard evidence connecting Daniel to the murders. Police visited the LaPlante residence later that same day to question him further. When they approached the house, Daniel, who was standing on the porch, turned and ran into the woods. He was clearly hiding something. The police discovered a number of incriminating pieces of evidence during the search of the home. During a search of the woods that separate the Gustafson and LaPlante homes, detectives found a shirt belonging to Daniel and a pair of wet gloves that they believed he had been wearing when he drowned Abigail and William. An all-points bulletin was issued, and a manhunt for Daniel ensued. in which a state police helicopter was used, as well as police dogs and nearly 50 local and state officers. Daniel did not take great care to stay out of sight while on the run. He abducted a woman at gunpoint, making her drive him around town in her Volkswagen van. Luckily, the woman managed to escape, fleeing on foot. Daniel LaPlante was now driving around in her van, and she called the police to report what had transpired. Police had received reports of Daniel's sightings from several others by this time. Thanks to the assistance of the public, police found Daniel 48 hours later at about 6:30 p.m. on December the 3rd, hiding in a dumpster at a lumberyard in Ayer, Massachusetts, about 11 miles southeast of Townsend. Daniel was arrested without incident, but police officers reported that he was laughing hysterically, which caused them to be confused. During the search of Daniel, the police found a gun hidden in his underwear. Daniel was charged with the murders of Priscilla, Abigail, and William Gustafson. He received a range of other charges related to crimes he had committed while on the run from the police. These were on top of the charges for his crimes against the Andrews family. Daniel pled not guilty to all 3 counts of murder. The trial for Daniel began in October 1988, by which time he was 18 years of age. Following a psychiatric evaluation, he was found to be competent to stand trial. Although Daniel was a minor when the murders were committed, the judge had already ruled that he would be tried as an adult. The prosecution called up to 50 witnesses, including several members of Daniel's own family. The prosecution's case against Daniel was rock solid, given the evidence and powerful testimony. The fact that Daniel came across so unlikable throughout the trial did not help the defense's case. All the while, he displayed no remorse and was constantly smirking. There was a sense of unease about Daniel among the judge, jury, and lawyers, including Daniel's own. The defense had a difficult time defending Daniel. The lawyer for Daniel argued that the evidence found at the family's home was circumstantial and may have been related to another family member. However, Daniel's brothers and stepfather all had alibis for the time of the murder. He attempted to gain leniency by referring to Daniel's hard childhood, during which he was sexually and psychologically abused by different adults, including his father, stepfather, and his psychiatrist. After approximately 5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Daniel guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences. He is currently incarcerated at MCI Norfolk Prison in Norfolk, Massachusetts. The Gustafson family and public were relieved by the sentence. In their opinion, Daniel LaPlante should never be allowed to walk the streets again. Since his incarceration, Daniel has been unrepentant in regards to his actions. While clearly suffering from a number of personality disorders, Daniel continued to demonstrate that he is a damaged individual beyond repair. From 1988 to 2014, Daniel tried to sue the courts on multiple occasions for violation of his rights. One case involved a claim that the prison system violated his religious rights since he was allegedly a practicing Satanist. Therefore, Daniel stated that the prison officials had denied him the materials he needed in order to perform certain satanic rites. It appears, however, that Daniel may have finally come to terms with his actions in 2017. While appealing for a reduced sentence, Daniel made the statement, quote, "I do not have the words to fully express my profound sorrow, but I am truly sorry for the harm I have caused. From the very essence of who I am, from the depth of my soul, I am sorry." End quote. Do these words reflect the sentiments of a person who regrets his actions? Could these be the words of a manipulative, delusional monster willing to do anything to attain freedom? Fortunately, Daniel's appeal was denied, and he will therefore have to spend the rest of his life behind bars without any possibility of early release. Daniel's final victim, Andrew Gustafson, passed away in 2014, so wasn't around to hear of his family's killer being banished to life imprisonment for good. However, upon his deathbed, Andrew allegedly claimed, quote, "Don't ever let him out. He should rot in prison." End quote. What little achievement it may be, it seemed that Andrew Gustafson got his wish. As for the Andrews family, particularly Annie and Jess, little is known about their lives post the imprisonment of Daniel LaPlante. Luckily, their lives were spared, and I'd like to say they had no lingering psychological damage. But I can't help but think how altered their lives are, and most likely will be forever, after experiencing the harrowing trauma in 1986.